Now we're going to talk about the video we just saw as far as bacteriological sampling. We've already discussed the groundwater rule, what we're looking at and for. Part of the groundwater rule deals with this analysis. Now, how many of you all pull samples, the distribution samples or the BAC-T samples? Okay, very, very good. Were there anything that seemed out of place in the video to you? Oh, you checked the bottles out, huh? Yeah, I want my bottles to look a whole lot newer than that, hopefully new, and that they are sterilized. They did say they were sterilized, so I hope that was in real true on that. But the other thing, he allowed the water to run over in one of those bottles too. And I was like, oh, you don't want to do that. When you're collecting samples, it's very, 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 very critical. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you don't flame anymore? Well, it depends on where you are. It's always an option. Now, when you're dealing with the consumer plumbing, you want to be very careful because based on the components of their faucet, flaming may not be the best thing, because if you come and you melt some of my plastic stuff, gaskets and things, I may have serious problems. And so flaming is an option. There are some people that still say they flame, but we're going to look at some other options too. A lot of people use bleach. How many of you all use bleach? Okay. How long do you allow the faucet to sit in the bleach? Or do you just squirt and go? Okay. How long do you all, is there any type of contact time? And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but one of the argument today, especially with the operators that are just squirting the bleach and then, you know, letting it flush and go, that we're not providing enough contact time for the disinfection process to occur. Well, it depends on, again, the strength of your bleach. But typically, you're looking at anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. If you look at regulatory guidance, is what some of the things that they recommend contact time for the effectiveness. But it goes back to, if you have a diluted solution, then it's even a longer contact time that's required to be effective. So we have flame, we have bleach that's used. Hydrogen peroxide, any of you all ever use that? Is another thing that is very, very, very potent, and that's out there on the market. A little chilly, huh? Yeah. In Houston or in Texas, we use it quite often. Now the thing is, we don't go inside the house, but we use the outside faucets. And that is common practice, so it just depends on where you are, what part of the states you're in, as to what you're doing. We do understand Louisiana, you all do not have a choice. You do not go inside because it's in your code, that all of yours are pulled outside. But there are some states still pull it from the homeowners, outside faucets. So.
I work for the city of Houston, and that is our standard practice. We collect from the incoming tap of the customer's house. Because we want to get the representation of what's actually going to the customer. But we do not go inside the homes. We find the nearest tap to the meter, to the front faucet in the front yard, and that's what we do.
Right, right. And we're going to talk about that, absolutely. That is a recommendation. And there again, recommendation is the key word there. You do lighten your chance, especially if you're dealing with the thread, bacteria growth and other pathogenic organisms to harbor in those areas. Also, you don't have the possibility of disinfecting quite as well as you should when you have those threads. And so that's one of the things that you want to make sure that you're aware of. Non-community systems, a lot of times they are taking it from inside the businesses, the schools, and so forth. So that is still common practice in a lot of areas there. One of the reasons that we are doing this analysis, of course, is because of the microbial quality. There are all kinds of diseases, pathogenic organisms, viruses, bacteria that can be transmitted by water. Some of them, typhoid, paratyphoid, amoeba dysentery, bacillary dysentery, hepatitis A. There's a whole lot of different strains because that's a virus that's always evolving. Now they're all the way up to hepatitis G. But A is the one that is transmitted by unsafe water, as well as E, which is a more pronounced case of A. We have cholera, Legionnaire's disease, Giardia, and Cryptosporidium. So those are the ones. And what's not up there? Measles, very good. Those are the ones, as well as many, many others that we are concerned with. And we want to make sure the water is treated to a quality to protect the public health in order to make sure those organisms are not present. And two of the ones are chlorine resistant that are up there. That is the reason why just your routine disinfection with chlorine, it'll do nothing as far as Cryptosporidium or Giardia. You'd have to have a heck of a lot of chlorine in order to actually affect those organisms there. They're very, very hardy, a cyst form, and they can survive in the harshness of environment. So with Giardia and cryptosporidiosis, or Cryptosporidium, a lot of people refer to it, must be removed by filtration. That's the reason every surface water plant must have some type of filtration. That is because of the Safe Drinking Water Act must to remove those organisms. Now, pathogens are difficult to detect. If you think of one drop of water, and get in mind, one drop of water, there are millions and millions of microorganisms in one drop of water. So think of, I'll use Houston, over 4 million people. That's 4 drops of water if we were all microorganisms. So in one drop of water, millions of organisms. That's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. But of those millions of microorganisms, yeah, you're drinking dead bugs or treated bugs. He's like, oh, there is no new water. I often say flush today, table tomorrow. Because where you're discharging it to, guess what? Upriver, someone's doing what? Pulling it for their drinking water. Or it's soaking down in the aquifer and we're pulling it back out. No new water. So lots of organisms there, but we do a heck of a job at what we do because we're all sitting up here looking healthy, right? Yeah, you do a wonderful job. So pathogens are difficult to detect because a very small, minute amount of those millions are actually pathogenic organisms. Remember, pathogens have to come from infected individuals. And as long as the intestines are healthy, you don't have the pathogenic organisms that are there. We all have all kinds of bacteria in our gut right now, and most of that bacteria kind of helps with the digestive process. So, pathogens very difficult to detect. We don't look for all of them. We don't test for all of them. But you've heard the saying, birds of a feather flock together. So we've identified one group of organisms. When they are present, usually that's an indication there may be some other pathogens that are present also. The coliform group organism is the one that we use as our indicative organisms. And remember, with the total coliform group, we have the fecal species, we have the non-fecal species there. E. coli is the most specific indicator of intestinal waste from warm-blooded organisms. And that's why E. coli is one of the ones that we are testing for because very specific for the intestinal waste of warm-blooded organisms. So if fecal coliform is present, it's an indication there is a risk of disease. Not necessarily a disease is there, but the risk. Okay, so collecting the sample, very, very important operator responsibility. Lab geeks, how do you want that sample coming in? Do you all do the water testing? And they went silent. I bring a sample in my Whirly Pack bag, and it's less than 100 mils. What do you do? Huh? You reject my sample that I've taken my hard time to collect? Okay. I bring a sample in and it's well over 20 degrees Celsius. You don't take that either. I'm pulling a sample on Friday and it's 5 o'clock, so I don't get it in. Can I bring it in Monday morning to have it? Can't do that either. If it's in a non-approved bottle, will you accept it for analysis? Okay, you heard it just from their mouths there. Those are very critical points. If you mess up with the portion of collecting the sample, the data, the integrity of the data is not there. So it starts with sample collection with the operator. Now you want to make sure that you have a representative sample of the distribution system. We don't want the home plumbing, we want what's coming from the distribution line. That's what we're testing. You have to submit a plan to the state telling your approved sites, the sites that you've chosen. You always want to get more sites than what's needed, but everybody must submit a minimum of 5 sample sites. Always do more, because you never know when you're going to need them. You submit that, the state has to give their approval. If, let's say, this month, one was positive, can I decide next month to go to another unapproved site? Because I don't want to go back to that site because it was positive. Can I do that? No. You will go to one of your alternate sites that's approved by the state. So your sample siting plan must be approved by the state. Sample collection is very important. You want to make sure you use the appropriate bottles for collection. For the coliform collection, the bottle contains a preservative. And that preservative, I say it's a preservative, it neutralizes the chlorine. It is sodium thiosulfate. You want to make sure you are careful. Do not rinse the bottle out. Do not allow the bottle to overflow because you've just gotten rid of the preservative that's there. So the number of samples we are collecting is determined by who or what? By the population. Very good. Population. If I have less than 1,000 people or less, that's 1 routine monthly sample. If I have more than 1,000 people, that's 2 or more routine samples. So based on population, will determine the number of samples collected. We've developed a written site sampling plan. You want to make sure that you're taking into consideration your entire system, your looped areas, your dead ends. You want to give a descriptive address to the state of those areas. So be very specific in that. For small systems, 3,300, well, 2,501 to 3,300, we're looking at 3 samples per month for collection. Now, outside faucets are common sampling points. I know in the EPA film they recommend inside, but when you take samples inside, you run the risk of whatever's in that plumbing of having a hit from that. So in order to make sure that you are taking, again, representative of the distribution system and taking out all the possibility of contamination from home plumbing, your best bet is to either install your own sampling point from the distribution system or choose an outside faucet. Some of the types of faucets we want to avoid, any swivel type faucets, and they showed you that with a single valve, that's a no-no. We want to make sure we're also always pulling from the cold tap. Faucets with leaky packing material around the stem. Commercial sink, they showed you a nice one there with all the chemicals and things like that. Make sure you're avoiding places like that. When you collect from places like that, if there's any type of splattering, if for whatever reason you take that top off and sit it down, possible contamination. And another thing, when you take the top off, make sure you don't hold the top up like that. Always make sure the lid is pointed downward. Little things like that may seem, oh, come on, are you serious? But can cause issues. You want to make sure your faucet's not too close to the ground with a lot of overgrown weeds and things like that. threads inside of their spouts, we want to stay away from those type of faucets. Again, smooth interior. And if your faucet has an aerator, if you have another sampling site, that's excellent. But if not, make sure you're removing that aerator prior to collecting the sample. And as we said, connect taps directly into the distribution pipe, and they showed you that in the film. You're going to cut out a lot of possibility of contamination with other entities and so forth, especially with customer faucets. So, Louisiana, we were told yesterday you're still using the Whirly Pack bags. How many of you all got it down pat on how to close them without the water? That was an art when, back in the day when we used to use those. But even the Whirly Pack bags are pre-sterilized, and they contain a little tablet, and that tablet is sodium thiosulfate for neutralizing the chlorine. There's a bacteriological sample analysis that we're doing. Okay, make sure you're sampling from the designated approved sites, and one of the other things is you want to make sure that you're not taking samples on windy or rainy days. No overhanging plants, no leaky faucets there. So make sure you've chosen your sites well. First thing you want to do when you get out there is flush the line. Why am I flushing the line? Okay, to flush out any contaminants that may be stagnant in the line, to make sure, again, it's representative of the distribution main. Excellent, excellent. How long do I flush? Okay, 2 minutes is the recommendation until temperature change, and that way I know I have water directly from my main. And once you flush the line, go ahead and cut that stream back. You don't want a full force of water coming out where you have all the splattering. And what we usually recommend to, like a pencil size stream there. And we're going to do a chlorine analysis. Why are we checking for chlorine residual? Because you told me that you disinfect with chlorine, right? I can understand if you don't have a groundwater system that you're checking for chlorine, you wouldn't check for anything you didn't put in there. But one of the things that we know, that if chlorine is not present, then the possibility of bacteria growth, can increase there. So we're going to check for chlorine, and hopefully we have that point too. If not, we're going to do some additional flushing, and we may have to do some operational duties if after all the flushing, because you don't want to flush until there's none. You want to make sure that you are the champions of the environment. You're going back, you're making the adjustments necessary to ensure that you have disinfection in that line. All right, then go ahead and disinfect the faucet. Again, there are some people that are still flaming, but you want to make sure that you are aware of the components of your faucets if you're choosing to do that. Alcohol can be used. How many of you all use alcohol? Okay, yeah. We have some groups that still use alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, bleach. And then there are some others that deem that no disinfection is necessary whatsoever, especially after you flush. Again, that's a preference call, not really a mandate unless your state has very specific collection analysis plans in place. All right, fill out the sample sheet and container. You want to go ahead and fill the container. Again, make sure it's a pencil-sized stream. 100 mils line, the lab need at least 100 mils. The amount of sodium thiosulfate is enough in order to neutralize more than that 100 mils, but don't go too much over it. A lot of times if we're doing a present absence, they're going to have to adjust. If you go over, take a little out to where it's 100 mils based on the chemicals that they're putting in to run the analysis. Do not overfill the container. And then the other thing is keep the sample cool. Now I know in the film you saw that they say keep it below 10 degrees Celsius. One of the things that I can tell you, if you go back to EPA method for analysis for water sample, you will not find in there where they make the suggestion of cooling the sample. It's good practice. But the presence-absent method does not require us to cool the sample. On the wastewater side, cooling the sample is a necessity. It is required by method because now I am enumerating the colonies. However, it's good practice to always cool that sample because any type of bacteriological growth will continue to happen with a warm sample. Cooling the sample is a physical preservative that will slow down any activity in that sample. So I agree if you want to argue, because I've had people to argue, well, that's not what the method says. You're absolutely right. This EPA method does not require us to cool the sample. But if your lab deems that you need to cool the sample, it's very important. The other note I want to talk about on cooling the sample, back in the day we used to use ice cooler. We had a little ice maker. We put all the little whirly pack bags in the ice, and by midday, guess what happened? Ice melted. We didn't have the nice rack like was in the video. So now all of our samples are swimming around in the ice. We've had a scenario where an operator collected like 15 samples. All of them came back positive from different areas, from different mud districts. What do you think the common denominator was outside the operator? Yeah. So possible contamination. And again, with private companies, and I'm from the private sector, we use operators for wastewater and water. So you may be collecting water samples in the morning, riding around and doing your wastewater collection too, in the same cooler, which is a bad practice. Should be separation. But we had more than 15 samples from 15 different mud districts come back positive. And of course, we wrote it off as operator error. But one of the things that we learned from that, do not immerse your samples in ice. Even better yet, make sure you use an ice pack in order to cool your samples. Okay, what else? Then you want to make sure you're filling out that form, the chain of custody from cradle to grave. So when I deliver that sample to the lab, someone should be taking it, sign it off on it, checking the temperature of the cooler. If I'm mailing my sample into the lab, there is also a chain of custody which must be filled out completely. Okay, you may not have the three-part carbonless form, but again, you want to have whatever works best for your company or city. Make sure the PWS number, public water system number, is there, and that it is marked distribution sample, because we're also collecting back teas every time we lay new mains or every time we do a repair, right? We do a repair, that line does not go into service until we collect the sample, right? Yeah, cool. Huh? Yeah, flush and go, huh? In theory. We have 30 hours to get it to the lab, but here again, your lab may stipulate they want it prior to 30 hours because the analysis must be started. What time frame do you all work with, lab people? 24 hours? Okay, cool. All right, so I've collected the sample, I've taken it into the lab, they do the analysis. Within 18 to 24 hours, I have a result. If my result is negative, I'm good to go, right? Not a problem. I go back the next month, do the same thing again. All right, another scenario, I'll collect a sample, send it into the lab, and it's positive. What happens at that point? Excuse me. The lab contacts me and say, hey, you got a positive, right? Then I know that I have to go back and take repeat samples. If I have more than one routine sample, for every positive, that's 3 repeats. If I have one routine sample, for that positive, there is 4 repeats, okay? Where am I going to take my repeats? I'm going back to the original site. I'm going within 5 connections upstream. I'm going within 5 connections downstream. trying to see if there is a problem with the source or is it in my distribution system. And we know now from the groundwater rule, in addition to this, what other samples do I need to pool? From the source, very good. Just want to make sure that we keep that in mind too. Excellent. All right, so all your samples, repeat, must be collected on the same day. The way the language is, within a 24-hour period. That's the reason they say on the same day. If you have one sampling point or that one routine sample, you do have the option to collect from the same faucet, 4 samples, or you can collect on 4 consecutive days. You have that option. Now, if my repeat samples are also positive, what do I do at that point? Have to what? Got to investigate. Not only investigate, I got to make a call. Who am I making the call to? Huh? Okay, good. I'm notifying the state first, right? I don't notify the public until I've notified the state, and I get their what I need to do, the form, in order to notify the public, in order to boil their water. Rolling boil for at least 2 minutes there. Now, in addition, other violation. If I'm supposed to collect 15 samples and I collect 14, is that a violation? Absolutely. Do I have to notify my consumers that I collected fewer samples than required? Yes. Absolutely. That's one of those tier 2s deal there. All right, so if the samples are not submitted, it's a violation. I can also exceed the total coliform maximum contaminant level if I'm collecting more than 40 samples. If greater than 5% of those samples are positive, that's an MCL violation. If I have fewer than 40 samples and I have more than 1 positive, it is a monthly violation also. If an acute risk occurs, an acute risk is any combination where there is fecal matter, E. coli, in the sample, even following a positive. So any combination. It could be a positive total followed by a positive E. coli. Could be a positive E. coli followed by a repeat positive total. But if it's just the total, it's not an acute risk. But any combination of E. coli, it's an acute risk, 24-hour tier 1 notification. Okay, we're going to notify the public within 24 hours by television, radio. You can hand deliver, any other method approved by your state. How many of you all are still doing the hand delivery deal for boil water notices? Small systems, yeah. We still do it too, quite a lot of places in Texas there. Now, I've put out a boil water notice. When all my samples are good and I have all negative, keep in mind, I got to do the same thing. I got to put out the notice the exact way I put it out initially, lifting that boil water notice. Okay. Now, the next month, after having that positive, how many samples am I collecting? Is it just my routine 15? Plus an additional 5. Okay. All right, exceptions to the rule. Now, let me ask you this. I had a positive, but all my repeats were negative. Can I request from the state to remove that positive? No? EPA does give authority to the state to make that determination. And in other words, they say, yes, you can have a sample invalidated. Now, what do I need to do to invalidate a sample? You must be able to prove why the sample was not representative of your distribution system. Remember, the first one was total positive, total coliform positive, all the rest of them were negative. If you can prove or show, and usually in the day it was operator error when we couldn't pinpoint. If you can show why it was not representative, you can request and have that sample, that positive removed, especially again if there's no repetitive history. The other thing that's up there that is possible through the EPA rule is reduced monitoring. Right now, for the most part, most of us are doing monthly monitoring or collection. But again, if you're those stellar people with no history of non-compliance, and they agree, the state agree, there are some that will go to a quarterly basis as far as analysis. To me, that's kind of iffy and shaky. I want to make sure that I can ensure the integrity of my water to my customers. And then the monthly monitoring worksheet that's in your book, it's a standard operating procedure to help keep you on track. The what ifs, when you have positive, what you need to do, how many repeats. Also, it will contain your monitoring plan. So with the monitoring worksheet, you can just pretty much stay on track there. Helps with the organization of the samples, the repeats, and the follow-ups. Any questions? The monitoring sheet in the book, if you will give me a second. It's either in Module 12 under the total COLA form. I'm checking to see if it's Module 16. 16 is where we actually go into the process of collecting the sample. So you have a little of it on 16-9. Really, it starts in the beginning of 16. Also 1220 for monitoring and public awareness. You have a mention of it there. And it should be also in the groundwater rule chapter, which is module 10, I think. So those worksheets will go a long way. Say what? Which page are you on? 16-10. No, not the boil water notice. When you were dealing with the worksheet, look under, again, if you're looking in Module 16, you're basically looking at that whole component, the sampling monitoring plan, the written sampling plan, 16-5. Really, it starts at the beginning, that whole section there. The other monitoring worksheet, right, well, part of the worksheet will be a part of the plan itself. There is a section in here, though, where they talk just about the worksheets, how important they are. I may have to get back with you exactly where, because they go into details on those worksheets in one of the modules. On 1220, now again, it's dealing with the monitoring, but it's not the language of the worksheet there. Can I get with you in a minute when I go through, when I have a chance to go through it, and I'll tell you all where the worksheet, because right now it's not popping at me exactly where those worksheets are in here, but it's in one of the modules where they actually walk you through the process of keeping up with the monitoring worksheet and how critical it is. Okay, good question though. We'll get that. All right, any other questions on the collection, bacteriological collection? Yes, sir.
If you get something that's positive on your system, and you said that you find this operator error, or maybe in the lab, some the state agency to get that.
to
removed.
invalidate it, right.
So that would,
Remove it. Now the key is, does your state allow for that? EPA rules allow for it. You need to make sure your state will allow for it. In Texas, ours do. I have gone into some states where they say that's not even an option on the table because they deem to be more, or they've opted to be more stringent than the EPA rule. But it's in the EPA rule, you have the right to request and to get it invalidated.
depending on the state.
Right. It is a state-to-state specific chemical contaminant rule. Any other question? None? All right, we're going to move on to the disinfection byproducts. The lead and copper. Right, your state, does anyone have any questions on the lead and copper? It was not one that your state requested. However, if you have questions, I can attempt to address them. Did you have any questions specific to lead and copper? That's why I went back, was because it was not one that the state requested. But of course, if you have questions, we will attempt to answer them. The other thing I like to point out in your manual, there's also a disc there. On that disc, you have all the latest revisions as well as the quick reference guides to all of the updates on the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that's what's on that disc, a wealth of information there. Now I'm stopped, and so I need to. All right, let's move on to the byproducts, which is Module 6. All right, how many of you all know what disinfection byproducts are and where they come from? Why are we concerned with them? Very good. Most of us are using chlorine or some form of chlorine as a disinfectant, right? And in years past, however, let me put it like this. When I first got in the industry, the rule of thumb, the more chlorine you add, the better it is, right? The better kill. Oh, you know, you've been there, done that too. What we didn't realize at the time was that too much was not a good thing. Too much chlorine and you have all this excessive organic matter that's naturally occurring, such as algae and other organic material, will find a way to combine. And once they combine, it creates trielomethanes. There's a whole group of them, and halioacetic acids. And these things have been known to cause cancer in laboratory animals. And so now it was like, we need to revisit what we're doing as far as we're doing it for the betterment, because we've already established chlorine was the best thing since sliced bread. It was probably one of the best invention of the 20th century because of chlorine, a lot of waterborne diseases was pretty much squashed out. How many people you hear of today dying because of cholera? Legionnaire's disease. If you look back at Columbia's time and date when he first came to Americas, 80% of his people died because of waterborne disease. The War of 1812, more people died because of waterborne disease than from gunshot wounds. You don't hear things like that today. Why? Because of disinfection properties. And we've been doing it for so long. And so it's too much that's an issue. And so now we have to address how do we get rid of the byproducts that are created. And that's what this module is about. And hopefully at the end you'll be able to discuss microbials. The microbials are just those pathogens that we're looking at specifically, Giardia, Cryptosporidium, as well as the byproducts of chlorination. So we're going to look at the regulatory overview, the health effects of these pathogens, the health effects of your byproducts, as well as how do we reduce them? How do we monitor for it? And it used to be, it was just a surface water problem. In other words, you have all this naturally or organic matter in surface water. In chlorine, you're going to have a whole lot of byproducts produced. There are some systems with groundwater because you have years and years of marshland and aquifers that's been, kind of where you're getting the water from, that they're pulling it up out of the ground with TTHM's problem. And then because of the stage 2, more in depth, they started looking at the distribution system. You have all these huge lines, very little usage of the lines, heat, and over time, what's going to happen? You're going to have the byproducts again. And that's why we have an average, now it's a maximum on the amount of chlorine that we can use or have in our water systems. What's that maximum? 4.0 running average. Can't exceed that now because of the byproducts. So, regulatory overview. Now they saw in the beginning and they understood microbial contamination posed a serious risk. If I were to just go out there in the creek or the bayou, is that what you all call them here too, bayou? And just take a swig of water, I'm at risk for a lot of things that may be in that water. Even the early people understood, you don't go right to the lake or the river front and get your water. You move back some, you dig a hole, and you let that water filter through the soil, because then you were providing some sort of treatment there. So hand-dug wells were safer than going to the nearest water course. Also, we talked about chlorine. Chlorine brought a sense of safety. In other words, a lot of these pathogens were just eradicated because of disinfection with chlorine. However, with that safety came the concern with the byproduct. Talked about, again, Columbus come here, 80% of his people wiped out waterborne diseases. The War of 1812, more died from waterborne diseases than from gunshot wounds. Can you think of how many outbreaks today from the 20th century where you've had a huge number of deaths because of waterborne diseases? What about just cases? Can't think of any? If I were to say Milwaukee, 1993, what comes to mind? It's one we often use in training. Cryptosporidium outbreak? If I were to say, what did they tell me yesterday? It was a B word. The amoeba brain eating. Oh, so now you remember one. That was here in Louisiana, right? Okay, cool. Haiti, 2010. Nothing comes to mind? Y'all don't get the newspaper here. All right. This is in your book somewhere too, where we're looking at the number of cases recent in the 20th century. Pennsylvania and Texas, woohoo! But we're not so proud of this. In 1998, 1,400 cases of Cryptosporidium. 900 in 1988, Shigella. Pennsylvania, you see them up there a few times. Missouri, all of these. Now, although we have a number of cases of outbreaks here, you can also note the number of deaths, very small. that means we're getting something right with the disinfection. But there have been still a number of cases that will pop up throughout because of problems. Wyoming, E. coli. Oregon, E. coli. So there are some outbreaks. Haiti, 2010, there was a massive earthquake there. Okay. And the earthquake killed quite a few people, 200,000, over 200,000. But there was a sudden increase in patients that came forth with diarrhea and things like that, dehydration. They didn't know what was going on, but after further study, they identified cholera, okay? And over the 470,000 cases, almost 500,000 people, more than 6,000 of them died because of cholera. That was a big outbreak. Again, whenever you have a reduction in water treatment, proper disinfection, then you will see serious cases like that. Talked about Milwaukee, 1993, Cryptosporidium. Again, you had almost close to 500,000 people affected by this. They only had a little over 100 die, and the ones that died were compromised in their immune system. In other words, again, the deaths were attributed elderly as well as aged patients. These were the ones that actually died. For the most part, most of the healthy people, we went through the symptoms and what have you, but rarely had to seek medical attention. And again, it was all because of this little old system, Cryptosporidium. They are not easily deactivated with common disinfection technique, highly resistant to chlorine. So again, because of that, we see the 1996 amendment. It developed rules to balance the risk between microbial pathogens as well as disinfection byproducts. So we're concerned with those protozoas that are very hardy, does not respond as readily to your routine disinfection, as well as the byproducts that we are creating with overchlorination. Phase 1 in the rule-making strategy in 1998, it kind of beefed up the 1996 amendments, whereas again, we're specifying Cryptosporidium. That came in phase 2. We also started to look at other water systems to identify those that were at higher risk to the disinfection byproducts. And again, what they determined was a lot of the surface water plants were falling under this particular rule. So, stage 2 of the disinfection byproduct rule ventured out from the treatment portion of it into your distribution system. And what a lot of systems are finding now is that they're having issues with the distribution, or they're having issues in the elevated tank because the water is just sitting there, and these byproducts are being formed. So we're having to revisit how we move the water through our systems continuously, how we make sure with those elevated tanks, the water is turning over within a time period that is meaningful to us. So evaluation of the distribution system fell under the stage 2. Purpose of it was to identify a location with high disinfection byproducts concentration. And once you've identified these areas in your distribution system, then they became your actual site for pulling your sample for compliance. Community non-transient, non-community water system that produce or deliver water treated with a primary or residual disinfection other than UV all fell up under this particular rule. And just to revisit what community was, we've already gone there. Community, we're looking at year-round service, 15 connections, at least 25 individuals. Examples would be municipalities, cities, mud districts, rural water supply corporation, mobile home parks. And then your non-transient, non-communities, of course, daycares, factories. You have 25 of the same individuals. So these systems had to go in and do an analysis of their distribution system. So we are looking at, as far as disinfection byproducts, total trihalomethanes, which comprises your chloroforms, your bromoform, your bromodichloromethane, your dibromochloromethane. It's a combination of all of those. You can also identify each of those by their very specific species to see which one is higher, because based on that, you may be able to trace it back to where it's coming from. Halyacidic acids. We have the monochloral, the dirochloramyl, the trichloral, all of those species all together. Now the maximum contaminant level for your TTHMs is 80 parts per billion. Halyacidic acid, 60 parts per billion. Patrice. No. Tell me about your distribution system. No, nothing. How well are you all doing with the TTHMs?
Great.
Quarterly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay,
Quarterly.
yeah. Did they make you all do any type of treatment to lower them?
No, actually, because we really don't have any problems with them.
Don't have any problems with either
For the
one?
most part, we really hadn't had any issues with anything with the levels of it.
Cool. Everybody else is on the same page? No problems with them whatsoever? You had to go to chloramines. Yeah, okay. Burley said they went to chloramines. Now, how does that help him with byproducts by changing disinfectant? What is the thought process there? Okay. Can I use you three as an example? Can you stand up here with me? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Stretch your legs, yeah, so he can wake up. All right, Gina is chlorine. And when you put a whole lot of Gina in there, and we're the naturally organic matter, Gina is wanting to combine with something, right? And if all that's in there is the excessive chlorine and the naturally organic matter, where will Gina go? If she was a molecule, huh? She's going to attach to all of us, right? If we're using Gina, she's still chlorine, and we put an ammonia in the mix of the naturally organic matter, then chlorine is most likely to combine with what? The ammonia. Forming what? Chloramines. Now you don't have this excessive chlorine to bind with the other organic matter, because now her outer shell is satisfied. She can't do any more combining. Does that make sense? So you add a different, thank you all. You all give them a hand for coming up here. You add a different disinfectant where the free chlorine does not have the possibility to combine with anything else. Usually by adding ammonia, you form the monochloramines. Now it no longer seeks the other organic material to bind with, because of the outer shell is complete and full. I can use chloramine. I can use chlorine dioxide. There are a lot of different options that are out there as opposed to chlorine. Now, in the old days, we used to use chlorine throughout the process. We use chlorine for taste and odor. We use chlorine as a pre-disinfection. We use chlorine as a post-disinfection. And what we ended up with in surface plant is all this excessive free chlorine looking for something to bind with. And so when you have, again, the plant matter, the natural organic matter that's there, it's just, yummy, yummy, yummy. And so now I have the byproducts. So an alternative disinfectant is always a way to decrease. Very good. What's in, huh? What? In the winter, that's another thing. Seasonal changes can also affect the outcome of your results. Okay. Now, are you doing chloramines? Okay, you buy surface water, they use chloramine. Do you add chlorine again? Yeah. And so sometimes, again, based on temperature, based on the length of time it is in the actual distribution system, you're going to have the formation of these byproducts and have the hits. So, the color of your water? That's the first one to me, that it affects the clarity, huh? Well, yeah, that's the reason I say it's the first time I've heard that, but it could be, I mean, you probably have seen that, so I can't dispute that. That's interesting. Okay, and it's groundwater and still groundwater? Okay. Okay. Too bad it's in groundwater. That's interesting. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that. Do they? Mm-hmm. The chloramines too?
Basically, you can't tell people that your water safe for your day and what's like things, but that's what it comes down to.
Right. It's a mindset. It's an education. Really? Okay. And they think that it's not treated as well because it's the chloramines. Yeah.
If you go to the West Monroe area and you stay in a hotel there, they actually have signs in the hotel where it's not bottled water.
Okay. Okay. That's what that. And other people, I have heard complaints of taste and odor because, again, based on how much ammonia you have, you're going to get that type of a reaction. Yeah, so your ratio, you have to do a lot of playing around to make sure that ratio. And the book ratio may not be the ideal ratio for your individual system because when we first started doing it, they say, oh, do a 5-to-1, a 4-to-1. Doesn't work for everybody. You got to know the characteristics of your water. And especially if you're doing a blending, because in Texas we're doing a whole lot of blending with surface plus the groundwater source. That's a whole nother animal to deal with. And so based on the chemistries, you can have issues. Based on seasonal changes, you can have that influx up and down there also. Where's my clicker? All right, so compliance activities with your community water systems, serving at least, where are we on there? Fewer than 10,000. I want to go to that one for small systems, so if you'll follow along with me. So fewer than 10,000, remember those were the medium and your small systems. You were to complete the initial distribution system evaluation by April 2008 was the compliance schedule. So you submit that monitoring plan. You were to complete the monitoring plan by March 31st of 2010 and report your IDSE July of that same year. Now we will begin subpart 5, stage 2 compliance monitoring by October. Is it here? Yeah, October is coming up. October 1, 2013. And again, by looking on that disc, you can stay up to date as far as with that quick reference guide, your timetable schedule. Very important if you're falling in these groups and you have to do it.
The state also has a drinking water watch website that you can actually get on and look at the system and see what you have.
Super. Did you all hear that? Your state has a website. The name of it? Drinking Water Watch. So you can check and you can see what your timetable schedule is. Excellent. There. For non-community systems, do we have any non-transient, non-community systems present? Your schedule is up there too. And again, you didn't have to do anything, but come October, they expect you to be on par with the stage 2 compliance, subpart 5. All right, so now we know where we are as far as compliance. The health issues that we're concerned with the microbial pathogens, of course, can be anywhere from mild to moderate case, severe infection. And remember, if you have a compromised immune system, it can and may lead to death. With your disinfection byproducts, they've been known to be carcinogenic to laboratory animals, also to cause reproductive problems as well as developmental effect. When you look at that chart or the table 5-7, most all of them have some health issues associated with the contaminants that we are monitoring, and that's why we are monitoring them. All right, so with your groundwater, as far as your disinfection byproducts, we refer back to the groundwater rule. And again, the whole purpose here is the microbial contaminant portion of it. We're looking at those fecal contaminations, and it will be applicable to groundwater systems, and then those groundwater systems under the direct influence of surface water. Basically what we said earlier, you're doing the sanitary surveys, you're looking at the water source, the treatment, the distribution, you're trying to identify any deficiency whereas correction can be made. And so I won't go over that again. The key with this one though, if you're serving 3,300 or fewer people, and if you're not meeting the required state minimum for disinfection in your disinfection in your distribution system, remember you got to collect every 4 hours until you get back up to that 0.2 and correct all deficiency. And one of the things that they have up here is to eliminate cross connection. What's a cross connection? So I have all those little question marks. And how do cross connections affect microbial contaminants? Okay, so cross connection is when I have a connection, physical connection between potable water and non-potable water, water that's treated to a lesser degree, or water I don't know what's in it. So I know that my system water meets whatever quality water that the state says it should and EPA says, right? So if I have a private well and I'm also connected to the public well, is that a cross connection? Why? Okay, there's no disconnect, and my private well may not be treated to the same degree, if at all, that the public water is treated to. Very good. Or, what if I have a hose that's laying out in a mud puddle in the backyard? Is that a cross connection? Yes, it is, because I can have backflow prevention device? Oh, check her out. Very good. If I eliminate it, it may not be, huh? Very good. I have a water supply truck, and I want to fill it up from the hydrant. And I don't have an air gap, but I just have the hose. Can I do that? No. Got to eliminate all of those. And as Patrice pointed out, there are several ways that I can eliminate cross connection. One is to have an approved backflow prevention device. Okay, one that's tested, right, by certified tester. Or I can have a air gap, physical space between the two to eliminate. Okay, super. And usually with that air gap, 2 times the diameter of the supply pipe, but not less than 1 inch. And I was told yesterday that your state is not less than 2. Keep in mind, each state, because of delegation, can always choose to be more stringent than the EPA rules. All right, the states have 2 years to adopt, again, under the byproducts rule as far as the groundwater rule, so I won't revisit that. Now, surface water was the other component of the disinfection byproduct rule and the microbial contamination. And with surface water source, of course, they're revisiting Giardia, Cryptosporidium. Why those two specifically? Because they are resistant to chlorine. So with all surface water plants, they must provide some form of filtration to remove these organisms, okay? Under the long-term 2 enhanced surface water treatment rule, again, purpose there was to reduce disease incidents associated with the pathogenic organism, as we've just stated. It applies to surface water and groundwater under the influence of surface water. That is, if you have a shallow well and every time it rains, your pH and stuff fluctuate, maybe an indication that you're under the influence of surface water. Or if all of a sudden you start seeing surface water organisms in your groundwater or insect, maybe an indication you're under the influence of surface water. So when you have a system like that, then 9 times out of 10, you'll have to start implementing some of the same treatment processes required by surface water. So LT2 boosted the existing regulations by targeting specifically Cryptosporidium. And there was, again, under this, you had to do a 24-month study where you're actually doing analysis to see what concentration of Cryptosporidium you had in your water. It requires provision to reduce the risk from uncovered finished water storage facility, and a lot of people just move from them altogether. And also it ensures system maintain microbial protection while taking those further steps to reduce the formation of byproducts. And there's money out there, especially for small systems who are unable to introduce the new treatment technology through federal loans, grants, Department of Agriculture Rural Utility, Housing and Urban Development Community, because the bottom line is they want to make sure that everyone is in compliance. So under your LT2, if you had a system with fewer than 10,000 people, you had to submit the information from your Cryptosporidium samples. In other words, for 24 months, you did the analysis. Then based on your result, what they did is put you in 1 of 4 bins. Bin 1, bin 2, bin 3, bin 4. How many of you all did the Cryptosporidium study? Very good. What bin were you placed in? Okay, because you have different systems there. What you would hope is that you would be placed in bin 1. Okay, very good, very good. Super. If you had under or below the 0.075 OLSIS, then you were put in bin 1. What that meant, you didn't have to do additional treatment. So you just darts that bullet. If they put you in bin 2, 3, or 4, based on what bin you were put in, you had to come up with additional treatment in order to reduce the possibility, either 1.5 log, 1 log reduction, based on your various bin there. Unfiltered system needed to provide a 3 log inactivation. Filtered systems commit to a 5.5 log of inactivation. And again, for your larger systems, they are denoted in your book, and you can read those at your leisure for the larger systems. There is a chart in your book, or a table though, that gives you, again, the timetable. For some systems, smaller systems, they allow them to do E. coli as opposed to the Cryptosporidium. And so that was good, but you're doing the same analysis there. Now again, based on what classification, fewer than 0.075 oocysts, you're in bin 1. If you had below 1, 0.075 to 1, you were in bin 2. 1 to 3, you were in bin 3. Greater than 3, bin 4. Or again, if you were not required to do cryptosporidium monitoring, you're automatically in bin 1. So what does that mean to you? Well, it meant if I was in bin 1 and I had a conventional filtration treatment system, no additional treatment was necessary. Even if it was direct filtration, no additional. Even if it was just slow sand filtration, I didn't have to do any additional treatment if I was placed in bin 1. If I was placed in bin 2 and I had conventional filtration, I had to provide a 1-log treatment inactivation, which meant that I can put in some other type of treatment technique, and whatever treatment technique put in, I had to ensure the integrity of it. So if it was UV, then I get so many points for that inactivation. Okay? So I had to develop a plan in order to see which one and how many points I get for my reduction in logs. Make sense? Clear as mud, huh? All right, brine filter systems, again, there I had to show again a 2-log or a 3-log based on my concentration of cryptosporidium over the 24-month period of testing. All right, so now that I know what bin I am, how do I reduce the byproducts? You can find an alternative water source, always an option. Find another source. You can change the place where you're pulling your initial source from your lake or river. In other words, move your intake. You can change the timing of withdrawal, bank filtration. We talked about that with the hand-dug wells and things like that. Pre-sedimentation, lime softening was even one that helped to reduce the byproducts there. So all of those were options. You have a lot of schematic in that book of alternative ways to reduce the process. Here with the 2-stage lime softening process, which can be utilized there, we're adding lime to the primary clarifier, carbon dioxide, and then soda ash again prior to the secondary, prior to going to the filters, and it's been known to reduce the byproducts. You can keep better check on your turbidity level, and in the testing, we know that EPA says that in 95% of your monthly samples, they should be below 0.3 nephrometric units. So you can keep hours on that. Combined filter effluent, running turbidity every 4 hours or more frequently, you're looking at less than 0.15. 0.15 is nothing unusual for surface water to be well below that as far as NTUs. And then with individual filters that we're doing every 15 minutes, we're still looking at below 0.15, 95% of the monthly samples. No filter should exceed 0.3 in 2 consecutive measurements. Now when it does, then you have to go ahead and do additional type of treatment. Other methods of reducing your DBPs, and they're spelled out, is utilizing the bag and cartridge filters. Again, another type of treatment technology. Second stage filtration is also doable, or using alternatives, as Burley pointed out earlier. He's using the chloramine. Chlorine dioxide is another option that many people go with. Very, very effective in the inactivation of bacteria and viruses and protozoas. In many cases, it's shown to be more effective than chlorine. Some of the drawbacks, it must be generated on site. It's going to cost you a lot more than chlorine is the other thing. And a lot of things people complain about is all the testing and analysis that they have to do above and beyond the chlorine with the chlorine dioxide. However, it does form fewer halogenated byproducts, and so you just weigh your options as to whether or not you want to go with this versus another chemical or another non-chemical. They have several schematic of treatment processes, again, with the various treatment. Here we're looking at the bag cartridge filters that are put in place. You can see there. And you can set those up in series or in parallel as far as the filtration. You're going to get a different type if they're set up in series. Of course, it's almost like a treatment, the treatment ponds I was talking to someone else. If it's a series, then as you go down the series, you're getting better and better treatment as opposed to parallel. You can do the bag cartridge filters in conjunction with UV. And again, each one of these treatment process will give you so many points for log removal. And that's what you're aiming at, is to get enough treatment technology in place to get you at the place where you can prove that 1 log or 2